Yeah, I'm going to talk about the Scaleway environmental impact calculator. So first of all, I'll talk about the scope, what we are calculating, then how the calculation works, and then some of our experiences with Boavizta API, which is used a lot in the calculator. So Scaleway, I'm sure some of you know, is a French cloud provider. It's about 25 years old. It does all the standard cloud stuff, virtual machines, object storage, etc. We started the environmental impact project maybe 3 years ago, doing lots of proof of concepts, quite a lot of internal pushing and marketing. We had to push quite hard to get the project started, but now it's going and there's a team working on it full time. I no longer work at Scaleway. As of about 3 months ago. So just to clarify, all this stuff is my own opinion, etc. This is not an official Scaleway presentation, but I was the tech lead of the project and I started the project. And I'm also a contributor to Boavizta API. So the project had 4 goals, or has 4 goals. The first one is to provide estimates before people choose a product. So when you're picking your virtual machine, we want you to pick the one with the lowest impact, in theory. Then we want to tell you what the impact of your past usage was, with a monthly report, for example. And then eventually we want to provide recommendations on how to reduce impact, and then further down the line, automatically take action to reduce impacts. For example, scheduling workloads at different times for you, or even migrating workloads between regions automatically. These last 2 points are kind of speculative. The recommendations, I think, is in progress at the moment, but all the automatic reductions, it's just planned. So what is included in the calculation? Well, we can think about what users do with cloud providers. They create an account, they use some products, and then they receive a bill. And we can map each of these 3 things onto the scope of the calculation. So first of all, in order to create an account, the company has to exist. We have to have employees, offices, laptops, etc. Obviously, we have to then have resources to serve the products. So we have to have a bunch of hardware for that. And then in order to do things like billing, we have another load of resources. So we have some servers that run the billing service. And all of this is included in the scope of our calculation. So your total impact of using Scaleway is a share of the company's impact, your direct impact, and then this indirect impact, which is your share of things like billing. So all the numbers that we produce all include these 3 components. And then the outputs of the project are on the product page. There'll be some impacts listed on there. We provide reports. There's also an API which users can use to query their own impacts. And then in progress is dashboard, a bit like billing. It's pretty standard. And then the recommendations, which I already mentioned. So ideally, we would say you have 10 machines running in Poland. Why don't you use these 3 machines in Paris that will have a lower impact, for example? So just briefly, what that looks like. On the product page, when you're choosing a zone, we show the estimate of the impact for that zone. This is pretty simple. This is just the impact of the grid multiplied by the PUE for the zone. PUE is power usage effectiveness. It's basically how many watts we deliver to clients for every watt in. So it's usually 1 point something, 1.2, 1.3. Then for each product, we show an estimate per hour. So here is where you're choosing a virtual machine. which at Scaleway are called instances. And this number here, this 1.24 grams, is that impact that I talked about. It includes your share of the company, the direct impact of using the virtual machine, and all the indirect impacts of all the other stuff. So that's all included in these numbers that we show on the product pages. The reports look like this. This is a report I created this organization like 2 days ago, so there's not very much impact in there. But you can see there's carbon footprint and water usage per project, per location, per product. There is a water usage. It's just so small that it's outside of the rounding. So it's 0.00001 or something. Then the API, it's pretty much like a standard API. There's some URL, and you provide filters like project ID, a start date, end date, product categories, regions, etc. And then we return a response that tells you all about your impact. So you get your total impact and then a breakdown per project, per region, etc. So that's the scope. Does anyone have any questions on that part? I'm happy to take questions as we go. If not, I will continue. So how does it work? Well, at the base of everything, obviously, is hardware. So some servers. This is pretty much the bread and butter of all of the calculations, is just working out how to share the impact of hardware. Each bit of hardware is part of a service. A service might be the virtual machines product, database as a service, billing, all that. Each service exists in one or more zones. Zones are things like FRPAR2, which is France, Paris 2, or Netherlands, Amsterdam 3. And each zone exists in a region. A region might be France, Paris, or Netherlands, Amsterdam. So what we do for an impact estimate for a type of virtual machine in Paris, we calculate the impact of all these layers, and then we share all of those layers based on your usage. We then take the data from billing, and we get a final impact. So we might say this virtual machine is 20 grams of CO2 equivalent per hour. We know from our billing data that you used that for 2 days. Therefore, we can calculate your impact. And that's how we generate those numbers in the reports. It's just a combination of the estimate with the billing data. So I'll just go through each layer of the calculation to describe the methodology and then give an example of a final calculation. So for hardware, it's pretty simple. There's 2 types of impact, the manufacture and the usage. Manufacture being the construction, transport, and disposal, and usage is just the consumption of electricity and water. And a piece of hardware will basically have a specification of what components are in it and some data about its usage. So the components will be the RAM, the CPU, the GPU, and the usage will be some kind of combination of a zone, electricity consumption, and its lifespan. To calculate the manufacture impact, we use Boavizta API. So we take this specification and we pass it to Boavizta API, and that tells us the manufacture impact or the embedded impact. To calculate the usage part, we don't use Boavizta API, which I will talk about later. We take an estimate of the power consumption. We take data from electricity maps, combine it with the PUE and WE for the zone, and that gives us our usage impact. So every time we have a piece of hardware, we can calculate its impact with the manufacture and the usage just like that. And so, as I said, this is the base of all the calculations. Everything from now on is just combining these impacts in different ways and sharing them. So service, what is a service? A service is just a pool of hardware used to run some product. services are split into two parts: the data plane, which is the hardware that actually runs stuff, and the control plane, which is the thing that manages the data plane. So concretely, an example for virtual machines would be the data plane is the servers that actually run the virtual machines. That's the hardware that users use. But around that, there's a bunch of other stuff. So there's a scheduler, there's a bunch of stuff for image management, and there's an API. So for each service, we look at the hardware that is used by users and the hardware that is used to serve that service. And we include all of that in our estimation of the impact. So for each service, we have a control plane and a data plane, and that just gives us two lists of hardware. And as I showed before, we know how to calculate the impact of hardware. And so the impact of a service is just the sum of all the hardware that it uses. Regions and zones now, pretty simple, but more data in a zone. So each zone will have some shared services running in it, like billing, IAM. It will have some networking stuff, some servers, switches, routers, etc. Then it will have the services that serve the products, virtual machines, bare metal, etc. And it will also have some details about the data center itself, the surface area, the amount of power the data center has, etc. So in order to calculate the impact of a whole zone, we take the list of shared services, we take the list of networking hardware, we take the list of services used to provide products, and then we calculate the impact of the data center itself. So to do that, we use some data from ADEM, which it says per meter squared of a data center, the impact is X of building the data center. It's not super accurate, but at least it's a number. And so, yeah, that's basically summing up what I just said. And then a region is pretty much a collection of zones. There's some region level networking hardware, but it's pretty much just the sum of all the zones inside it. So what does that look like in reality? So we want to know the impact of a virtual machine in Paris Zone 1. So obviously, we need to know about the impact of the Parisian region and the zone, which I just discussed. And then there's the service that runs the virtual machines, which implies a bunch of hardware. That's the direct impact of what you're using. In zone FRPAR1, we may also have some elements of the billing service. Now, we need to attribute a fraction of the impact of the billing service to you as a user, because you are using something in Scaleway. We may also have the IAM service running in the second zone, and we need to attribute part of that impact to you as well, because you are using Scaleway, and that's part of Scaleway. And then equally, there might be other stuff running in other regions that we need to attribute as well. So the key thing here is that the impact of using a product in Paris will also include a share of the impact of stuff running globally, or services used indirectly by you to serve that product in your region. So the key takeaway here is basically each impact you're seeing is like a tree of other impacts that we add up to create that final number. And the final missing piece is how we share things. So if we go back to here, we look at this billing service. We need to share the impact of the billing service between all users of Scaleway. And to share impacts, we use two kinds of ratios. We have a power ratio, which is where we look at your divided by the total power available. And that gives us an idea of how much of that impact you are responsible for. Then, if we're looking at manufacture impact, we also need a time ratio. So we look at how long you did your stuff divided by the lifespan. So if we want to share the impact of the manufacture of a server across its lifespan with a bunch of users, we need both of these ratios. And so to get a shared impact, you take your total impact, you multiply it by a power ratio and a time ratio. And I have a couple of examples now, which should make that a bit clearer. So let's say building a data center generated 2 tons of CO2 equivalent. These I just made up these numbers; they're not real. And you are using a virtual machine in that data center, which consumes 200 watts. The data center has a total reserved power of 500 kilowatts. We've used it for 1 hour, and the data center lifespan is 25 years. So we use our formula here to calculate our share of the impact of the data center. We take the total impact times by your power consumption divided by the total power consumption times by your usage duration divided by the lifespan of the data center. And your share of this data center build is 0.004 grams of CO2 equivalent. So in every number everywhere, between all of the users of this data center, we are sharing the impact between all of the users with this. Another example, just to make it super clear, let's look at the usage. So in zone 1, the control plane for the virtual machine service is generating 200 grams of CO2 equivalent per hour. Again, our VM consumes 200 watts. Then to share the impacts in that zone, we look at the total power consumption of all the VMs. Let's say that's 50 kilowatts. We use the virtual machine for 1 hour. So therefore, we share this control plane by doing 200 grams of CO2 times by 200 watts divided by 50 kilowatts. And again, it's a small number, but it's shared between everyone. So that's CO2 is our share. Don't worry if you didn't understand any of that. If you are interested, there is a detailed doc, public doc, and we generally stick to the ADEM PCR methodology, which is in French there and English there. So if you're interested in any of that, you can look at the docs there. And then finally, our experience with Boavizta API. So positives first, of course, there's lots of them. It's all open, public, validated data. So we can use this data. And if anyone has any questions, we say, look, we use Boavizta data for the manufacture part. Go and look there. And it's pretty trustworthy. We can take any arbitrary server and get an estimate for it, which is great because we have a lot of different types of hardware. It's super easy to deploy. We just run a few replicas of the Docker image in a Kubernetes within Scaleway. And it's stateless with no database. It's just one image that we deploy, which makes it super, super easy. There's also some more low-level APIs we use. I didn't go into all the details of how we calculate the electricity consumption, but we do use the CPU consumption profile endpoints of the API as well, which is super useful. Then things that could improve or that were blockers for us. So I said earlier that we didn't use Boavizta API for the usage part of the calculation. That's because of a couple of blockers I will talk about in a second. The other major blocker is the lack of GPU impact estimations, but that is in progress. We're working on it now on the Boavizta side, thanks to the work by David and company. And then, yes, the electricity impact factors in Boavizta are quite out of date, also not live. So what we wanted was live electricity maps data to give us our impact factors. Both of these issues are open on Boavizta API. I hope I will get an opportunity to look at them soon. And then nice to haves. Yeah, there's a few places where the API fails silently. If it doesn't find the CPU, for example, it won't tell you. It will just use a default one. Sometimes we wanted to have a strict option where we say, don't fail silently, tell us. Caching is something that we've put in place internally. I think everyone who uses this kind of service puts some kind of caching, because the answer is always the same. If I say I have a server with 2 CPUs and 50 gigs or 64 gigs of RAM, the impact will always be the same. So I don't need to keep calling the API. Again, on that point, adding some kind of batch endpoints would be useful. If we have 1,000 servers that we want to calculate the impact for, that means 1,000 requests to the Boavizta API. It would be easier if we could batch them up and just do a request for 200 servers, for example. And that's it. That's the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Are you still there? Ah, yes. Here we go. Can we have a full reproducibility of the... Yes. This is a good question that I personally pushed for quite a lot internally, being able to see that full tree that I described. So if we go back to that, well, this will take a while. Let's go back to this slide here. So the problem with the full traceability of this calculation is I would need to tell you which of our services are running in which zone and what hardware they're using. I would need to say to you, our billing service runs in these 2 zones and it uses this hardware. For me personally, I don't think that's very sensitive information. But at Scaleway, they were reluctant to send that level of traceability publicly. I don't know why. But we do give quite a good breakdown. It could definitely be better. Yeah, Boavizta version used, ADEM version used. That would be cool. Having a proper footprint of, like, you know, this is the fingerprint of what your estimate was. So in answer to your question, no, but it would be cool. And a lot of the time, the answer is privacy on our side. Any other questions? People are typing.
Yeah, Ben here from Greening and Streaming. In the early results you've seen, have you done a sort of sensitivity analysis to, because there's times you're talking about 0.000 grams here, and so if I just want to do a quick hack, I'm using your services and my boss tells me, can you get the footprint down quickly? Where is the power? Where are you generating carbon in that tree? Where are the problem childs, and what are the ones that are actually okay? There's no urgency to address.
Well, so I love the question, because there's a few things in there. One of the things that I'm personally really interested in is the error margins on each of these numbers. Some of the numbers are just some fixed constant somewhere that we multiply one thing by another thing and then we get a number. I would love to know the error margin on all of these numbers, because if you look at this tree, there's going to be hundreds of different numbers going into this calculation. And so there's a big accuracy question there. Our aim was always to give an estimate rather than not give an estimate, but there was a problem with, well, it's an interesting question about error margins there. In terms of sensitivity, there's 2 types of impacts that go into here. There's the direct impact, which you can control. So that's the first thing. And then there's the indirect impacts that you cannot control. So like the billing service, you can't change the number of servers that the billing team use to run their service. So then you can get that level. You can work out what your direct impact is. But in terms of working out the sensitivity within that, that falls into the category of recommendations, which unfortunately they haven't started work on yet, but it is planned. So I love the question. It's an excellent question. I would love to work on it, but we haven't started work on it yet.
Simon, you got another question from Francois.
What are your levels of granularity on the service side? 1 figure, all types of storage or more, and on the customer side at subscription level. Resource tags would be cool. Yep, that's a big question within Scaleway at the moment, doing a kind of global tagging thing, but that's by the by. Granularity, this relates to Ben's question, where it's like, internally we have really high levels of granularity, but it's kind of filtered for the output. The output is pretty much, you get a high level, here's your manufacturer impact and here's your usage impact. To Ben's question, that makes it very difficult as a user to work out how to reduce it, because you don't know what you're controlling and what you're not. So the levels of granularity, I would say, are very high internally, but in terms of what you get from the API, not so granular, unfortunately. I've got to be. I no longer work at Scaleway, so I can't be too negative about it. But yeah, I wished that we could have pushed more granularity out to users. Cool. Okay, well, it's almost lunchtime. So unless there's any more questions, feel free to just ping me on. I'm on Mattermost. I'm always around.